Do you want to learn how to nag successfully? We have an amazing show today. We're going to, everyone says, don't be a nag. You shouldn't nag. Today, you are going to learn how to nag exactly successfully. We have Dr. David Lieberman, unbelievable, world-renowned, has 12 books translated into 26 languages. Hello. Okay. He has, he's consulted the FBI, all branches of the military, the NSA. He's an amazing, amazing human being and a deep, sweet man. We're very, very lucky to have him on. Stay tuned. This is the psychologist who's going to answer exactly how to nag and how to get things done and change other people, which is wild. So the first question I have for you, doctor, how do you successfully nag? Is it possible?
What's that?
Is it even possible?
Yes, indeed it is. And, nagging has a negative connotation, of course. And I always tell people that nagging is reminding somebody of something that they already know. So nagging in and of itself, the definition of how we traditionally do it is take out the garbage, blah, 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 is not effective. And we know that. Telling somebody something they already know just really infuriates perhaps your spouse and makes you more frustrated. The key to being effective in gaining cooperation, there are a number of things, and I guess we'll sort of unpack the psychology as we move along. But the basic premise is nobody wants to be, nobody really moves forward from a position of weakness. Meaning, when you tell your spouse they're doing something wrong, right, whatever it is, unless they are an amazing, perfectly balanced, emotionally solid person like me, right, you're going to run into a problem. 3 things happen. 1 is they get angry with you. 2 is, if it's legitimate, they get angry with themselves, they're feeling ashamed. And 3 is they're justifying to themselves and to you all of the reasons why it is that they're doing is right and makes sense. So all you're really doing by nagging is you're further ingraining the behavior in, meaning traditional nagging. The optimum way, and again, there's a lot to unpack here, the optimal way to do it is to come from a position of love, of respect, of kindness and appreciation. Meaning, you can give me a generic example, a specific one, or I can take one if you want. What's your...
Yeah. An example, taking out the trash. That's a big bugaboo because then it starts to smell and the wife is like, how many times do I say after dinner, please do that? Or whenever it is, or when you go out in the morning, whatever.
Right. So at first, it's interesting. Garbage has become gender specific. It's almost ubiquitous that it's the man's job. Maybe it's something we can revisit another time, but okay. But listen to what you just said in terms of language, how many times you have to say. You'll see a lot of overlap, when it comes to child raising as with our relationships with our spouse. And by the way, the number 1 rule is ignore what you can ignore. Just because somebody did something that you don't like, I got to tell you, it is just so powerful to focus on being more positive. You'll have a whole different atmosphere in the house anyway, and you'll feel differently because you won't be focused on the negative. But let's say, hypothetically, you're living in a house where your husband doesn't take out the garbage. So telling him, how many times does it tell you that, blah, blah, blah. All it does, again, is he gets upset with you. He gets upset with himself because at some level he realizes he should do it. And 3, he's explaining, I'm very busy, I'm doing this and that. Rather, the next time he takes out the garbage, even if it's every 72 years, like Haley's Comet, whatever it is, whenever he takes out the garbage, you simply acknowledge and say, by the way, I know you're busy doing 1,000 other things. I just want to let you know I really appreciate, you going ahead and taking it out. Or rather than phrase it as how come you don't do your job, ask it as a favor. We all love doing favors for people, for our children, our spouse, the next generation. What we don't like are obligations and responsibilities that maybe we feel were unfairly placed on us. So, for example, if somebody's expecting something and you deliver, it's like, oh, very nice, you did your job. But if you say to your spouse, example is, I know you're so busy, and legitimately so. Don't make up doing this and that. Do you have 2 seconds to take a garbage? I so appreciate it. Now he gets to feel like a great guy. He's doing something for you as something nice. Is it his responsibility? Is it not? Is it obligation or not? It doesn't make a difference. The fact that he does it for you should come with your acknowledgement and appreciation. The fact that he continues to do it should also do that. You'll find that your husband slacks off and lacks off in those areas where you're not reinforcing with appreciation.
So you're saying it's kind of like that's acting like he's a little kid in a way.
He is, Leah.
So look, you know what? it's like this. We all have that little part inside of us. Let me give you a fantastic example, which happened maybe, I don't know, about a month ago. During this whole thing with COVID, you know, everyone's having backyard binyamin and so on. So I happened upon one, and there was like a bar mitzvah boy, 13-year-old, 40, whatever, he laned. It wasn't on Shabbos or a weekday. And so afterwards I said to the, you know, the guy who's I guess it was Balabos's house, and I said, you know, give a shout out, say Yeshikah, you know, great job to the boy who read from the Sefer Torah. And he said, no, he does it every week for us. So I said, so let me get this straight. If he just did it that one time, you'd say great job. But the fact that he always does it, suddenly that makes you exempt from acknowledging it. Wouldn't you think it'd be the other way around? And what I said, and I said it, well, I want to say I said it nicer, but I didn't. But he's a great guy, a sweet guy, and instantly he got it. That's, you get stuck being my neighbor. This is what you get almost in the morning. But he got it. And, you know, we don't realize, you know, all the things our spouse does on a daily basis, the one time they drop the ball, that's what we highlight. Wouldn't it be amazing simply to say, so I said, you know, so he always does it, so you should say great job all the time. Once again, going back to the original thread, you will find that those areas that you reinforce, and genuinely so, with acknowledgement and appreciation, go a very, very long way. Forget about the great job it does with modeling for the kids to see around the table that you say, you know, thank you, you know, for going out to earn the money to get this, whatever. Thank you, mommy, for cooking the delicious thing. When you acknowledge these things, the kids become ensconced in the idea about showing appreciation and gratitude for what someone does for you, which is an essential an essential trait that we need. Yeah.
Doctor, you're saying that the way to nag is to not at the time zip your lip. We have this little duct tape, right? And we got cute duct tape. We're girls, you know, whatever. Put the duct tape on. Just don't say anything. Don't nag, but instead just show appreciation when he does do the thing.
Right. So it's like this. First off, I have duct tape in my house. I'm about as handy as a paper cup. So if it can't be fixed with duct tape, it doesn't get fixed. But no. So look, very often people say when they hear that, and you're not wrong, you know, well, doesn't there ever come a time when I could politely point out, you know, X, Y, Z that you're doing this? And there is, but there's a protocol that we should follow. So for those times when you absolutely positively have to bring something up to your spouse, meaning you can't simply just, you know, acknowledge when he gets it right. Maybe he just never gets it right. There is a basic protocol. And if you want, I can lay that out. It'll take about 90 seconds.
Oh, yeah. What is it? Yeah. Go.
Okay. Number one is that...
Yeah. What do you have?
Yes. One. So, you know, the only issue is that, and I don't know if this is even an answer that could be answered, but why is it that men just don't get it? Meaning, like, a woman sees something needs to be done and she gets it done. Like, why does a woman even have to tell her husband to take out the garbage?
Why is it her job?
Like, it should be a given.
So answer.
Right. So, let me give you an example. I'll make a great analogy. You know what? It's like if you're a coffee person. There's a coffee house opened up here in Lakewood where I live. I don't know how many years ago. Like a real regular kosher coffee house. And I walked in and I was greeted to this board of coffees from 70 different origins. You know, from different countries. Although pretty much half the countries were overthrown by dictators. But, you know, very nice. So I go to the guy at the front and I say, you know, can you make me a coffee? And, you know, proprietor, you know, day two. And he looks up and goes, which coffee do you want? And I'm looking up at this board. I say, you know, in the old days when they used to be regular and decaf, I want one of those. And he looks crestfallen. And he's like, let me make you something special. So anyway, he's brewing. He literally has a beaker. A lovely guy, by the way. He comes back out, you know, 15 minutes later for a quick cup of coffee. And he gives me a cup. I guess he made himself one. I'm looking around for cream and sugar because this thing just tasted like vile. But he's like, do you notice the aroma, the nutty hints? I'm thinking nutty for sure. But he's going on about this. Now, what's the difference between a coffee aficionado or a wine connoisseur and a regular guy like me? Is their knowledge, right, increases their awareness. They know things. That means they could see things. If someone is not important to them, right, they simply don't see it. If the kitchen garbage overflowing is not important, it's just not in our purview. I don't want to get too sidetracked down like a dozen rabbit holes, which I tend to do, but there's something called the reticular activating system, the part of the brain responsible for focusing in on what's important, located right here in the in the Lusbone region, is right around the brainstem. It acts as a filtering mechanism, which is why you ever be at like a party or a simcha or a conversation, and you realize there's a much more interesting conversation happening like about 20 feet away, and you mute the person in front of you and you like pick up this conversation, right? That's the reticular activating system. It hones in on what's important. If it's not important, if you don't hear your name mentioned, if you don't hear someone's talking about the Ladies Talk Show or about the latest this or that, something that gets your ear, it doesn't even enter into consciousness. So the long answer to the very good short question is, it's simply not important. If it's not significant, he doesn't see it. Therefore, you have to raise his level of significance to the point where it actually goes into his radar. Does that make sense?
She got it? Yep. Yeah. Yes. Very. Okay.
Yeah.
But hole you started to go down. You said
right. Okay. So the next one. I'm sorry. We wanted to cover very quickly if you have to bring something up. Yeah.
What'd you say? What'd you say, Doc?
We were going to cover very quickly if you want to bring something up to your spouse, your husband that is doing. Okay. Right. So again, ideally, you would just try to focus on the positive, acknowledge when he gets it right. But when you have to bring it up, number one is this: I can't tell you how many times people will tell me that their spouse does something that bothers them, and I say, "How many times have you told them?" And they're like, "Well, how could he not know? You know, who leaves toothpaste off the tooth? Yeah, who does it? He's not the amazing Kreskin. Everyone knows more than 50 minutes. He's not a mind reader. I know. You know, we can be a very thick species sometimes. If he doesn't know, he doesn't know. You have to tell him. Now, how you bring it up makes all the difference in the world. Number one is this: you cannot bring it up when you're in a state of what we call constricted consciousness. When you're in a bad mood, he's in a bad mood. You know, it's been brewing all day. He walks to the door and you pounce. Bad idea every time. When you're in that negative space, you cannot see from the other person's perspective. We can get into empathy and validation, also very, very critical in relationships, particularly with our spouse. But you have to make sure you're both in a positive state. Neither of you are hungry, tired, cranky, and you can have the conversation. Next, soften the startup. As you well know, John Gottman, who talks about, a lot about relationships, so you can predict how the conversation goes based on how it begins. We think sometimes that if we don't scream our point, or, our anger isn't commensurate with the sound of our voice, they're not going to understand.
Explain that, Doctor. I didn't understand. What do you mean? It's how it begins is how it goes.
Excellent. Pretty much. I'm sorry. If you come in guns blaring, screaming, it's going to end guns blaring, screaming. If you come in literally speaking softly, come in and say, in a pleasant way. In other words, we think sometimes that our spouse won't hear us unless we scream, but that only creates more of that. And you know, in your own life, anyone that yells, you just sort of shut down. You can't really hear it. So you have to literally speak softly. Wait until you're both in that good space. Don't make it about him. In other words, if you come in and you attack your husband, you say, when you do this, when you do that, it's wrong, it's bad. We sort of, we put a moral stamp onto the husband's behavior, and we say, this is wrong, this is bad. No. Say,
No, it's true. What do you say?
It's true. But again, we see this a lot in politics also, is that in the old days, you could disagree with somebody, we each have a different perspective. Now it's, you're not just wrong, but you're bad. You're an evil person for holding that view. So when you tell your husband, you know what, it's wrong when you blah, 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 he can't not get defensive. Again, we're assuming that is not the healthiest specimen on the planet. And all of us, even the healthiest amongst us, at our weakest moments, have a hard time hearing criticism unless it's packaged just right. So here's the thing. If you don't put your spouse in the defensive, if you don't say he's done anything wrong, he can't argue with you. Therefore, take the example of garbage. Once again, come in when you're both in a good space, soften the startup. Say, I'm having a hard time with this. I know you do, you do X, you do blah, 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 and I so appreciate that. And by the way, I know in the scheme of things, it's really silly. At the end of the day, I can take out the garbage too. I can get big garbages that are twice. I can do these things. I have a hard time when X, Y, Z. At no point in here did you tell him that he hasn't listened to you, he doesn't respect you, his behavior is wrong. It's like, this is something that, we don't argue over things. We argue over a right to be heard, to be respected, to be appreciated. So if he understands where you're coming from, it's not that he's a bad guy. It's not that he dropped the ball. Don't you see everything I'm doing? How hard is it for you to take out you may present a very logical argument and you'll lose because it's not about logic. It's not hard to take out the garbage. I've done it maybe a handful of times. It's not difficult. What bothers us is that if our spouse feels like we're letting them down, that we're the bad guy and wrong. So come into and let them know. It's your problem, by the way. In the scheme of things, most things our husband does is not the end of the world. So if we say, I'm just having a hard time with this, could you just, when you see it, great, I know, and I'm sorry that I'm making a big deal. He'll be like, no, don't worry about that. Right? He's happy to make you feel better. He just doesn't want to feel bad.
So I have a question in here that came in that said, I feel like my husband isn't a equal partner, that I do most of everything. So it's besides garbage, probably dishes, probably everything, run a household, whatever, making sure the insurance is paid. I don't doesn't say.
Look, okay, yeah. Look, every family has its own dynamics, and it would be reckless of me to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. Having said that, I'm going to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. And that's as follows. It's if you feel that it's not marriage really isn't a partnership. It's two wholes coming together. When you see it as a partnership, you're like dividing stuff up, maybe in an artificial way. I always encourage spouses, as well as when it comes to parenting, to lean into the person's strengths. For example, let me just give you an example from in child raising, because sometimes it's easier to see it with our kids. If you have one kid that just loves to cook, really talented in the kitchen, but doesn't like doing other stuff, there's what to be said for encouraging and fostering where he or she excels in, and then in those other areas, just sort of a little boost to round out. But you don't have to drag somebody across realms that they have a very difficult time. See, for this person's husband, it may be mind-numbingly impossible for him to sit down and to pay bills. He may procrastinate until the end of the month. For other people, it's not a big deal. So if it's one of your strengths and lean into it, great. Having said that, if you feel like everything seems to be your strength and your husband isn't picking up any of the slack, it would be proper for you to have a conversation like we just laid out here. But once again, not from you dropping the ball, not from you doing anything wrong, not from do everything, you do nothing. Rather from, I so appreciate, again, you do this, this, and this. I'm just having a hard time juggling these things right now. I know you don't love to do these things. Is there any way, and again, and you phrase it like this, if you can't, I get it, by the way, I don't, please, if you can't, I get it. Sometimes we show more appreciation and kindness to the toll booth collector than we do to our own spouse, right? Thank you so much. I appreciate the change. Thank you, right? But when it comes to a spouse, it's be nice, like you're talking to a stranger. If you can't do it, I understand it. Your husband will be like, no problem. Or if he doesn't do it, at least you'll be able to close the door and call it a day, but you will have done your due diligence in terms of asking him.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. Hold on. We got a question coming in.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so firstly, before that, Dina from Torrany Times live stream said, Leah always has the best guests. So much info here. We'll have to listen to the show a few times.
Awesome.
So
Thank you, Dina.
Lots of information.
Thanks, Dina. Yeah.
But at what point, one of the questions that came in is, at what point does a wife have to maybe be honest with herself that she's just not, like a woman who thinks that everything's on her, maybe she just wants to do it her way and he's never doing it right. So to her, she just takes on the brunt of it, meaning like people are a little bit, meaning it's there.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, right. Make no mistake, right. I had a conversation actually with somebody in my office this morning about this. And that is that, if you're insistent on your spouse doing something a certain way and they won't do it that way, and then you do it and you're frustrated that they don't do it, or they do it wrong, you get frustrated, you're always going to be in that no-win. It's really time to have an honest conversation with your spouse and with yourself about what is practical. This way you can just take it off of your head and constantly be frustrated, because if your expectations exceed your husband's capacity or the capability in this area, you'll always find yourself behind the eight ball and frustrated. So, in a case where, you want your husband to go shopping. Now, I will tell you from the personal files, my wife sends me to the store. I don't know about you ladies, but my wife goes over the list with me, even though English is my first language, goes over with me. And I'll come back, with, 10 items, 9 maybe wrong. But by the other day, I come back with, tomato sauce. She looks at it like, oh, you got this tomato sauce. And being a keen observer of human nature, I realized the emphasis on the word this meant that it was going to go to the cleaning lady. But, could your spouse have done something smarter, easier, better, faster, the way you would have done it? Sure. I thoroughly encourage you to edit yourself, even if your spouse didn't do it the way you wanted. And again, I know that some women are conscientious in certain areas, and it's obviously you are one, and it's tremendous. No one wants to go to a doctor that's happy with 80%, or somebody that is okay doing a show. But you give it your all. Having said that, the problem is if you hold your spouse to those same expectations, Hashem put you together for a reason to balance you out. So you're not going to really find two perfectionists that are married together for more than 10 minutes anyway. So when your husband does it, I encourage you, even if it's not the way you want, if you want him to get better at it, it won't come from telling him that he did it wrong. It'll come from amazing, thank you, I appreciate that, hold on to that, right? All that stuff after he already gets his pat on the back. Before you ask him the next time, see, if you set him up now and say, I appreciate this, but next time, can you? In his head, he thinking, not in a billion years. Rather, he did it, amazing, terrific. The next time you ask him to do that same thing, that's when you say, by the way, I so appreciated XYZ before. Would you mind blah, 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 doing it this way? Now it's fresh. Now it's not a criticism. You just ask him to change his approach. That's the way you gain cooperation moving forward.
Awesome. You have 12 books. A lot of them talk about how to get other people to change. Can you please, standing on one foot, how do you get people to change? I get that question emailed to me every month. Right.
Look, I could give you the, scholarly answer of, we can only change ourselves. But that's not true. I mean, yes, end of the day is, reorienting your perspective, looking at your spouse, seeing him differently. I got to tell you, by the way, will change his behavior towards you. If there's one way, and it's not a sort of, ephemeral, abstract, heebie-jeebie thing, if you are conscientious and focus on your husband's milas, his strengths, what you recognize and appreciate in him and for him, and celebrate even his weaknesses. Meaning you don't just accept them. Acceptance is a very low level. Celebrate them. It's who he is. It's why he's your other half. And you really own his greatness in whatever pockets you're able to resonate with, you will find that he will be a different human being. I mean, it's just amazing. Having said that, yes, there are psychological tactics to gain cooperation, but the swiftest, most organic way to change somebody is to change your perception of them. Once again, I'm sorry.
Right to the sources here, because Rav Moshe Cordovero, and this is, everybody can put this into their heart, because if you can take this on in a deep way, it's very, very powerful. And it's a game changer of mentality. Rav Moshe Cordovero gives over that all bracha comes from Shemaim through the husband and to the wife, meaning all blessing. That means everything that you own, the earrings on your ear, the little piece of rice that fell on the floor, everything in your home is from the bless, and that's from just materialism. It's also spiritually, emotionally. Every blessing that comes from God into your home is as a result of your husband. Now, I have women who's, feminism and whatever, and I'm not anti-feminist in any way, shape, or form. I'm talking, let's get powerful. And how do you do that? If you understand that your whole focus towards your husband and you're, putting him on a pedestal or whatever, does exactly what doctor is empirically telling us works like magic, because you are seeing your husband as the source of blessing, giving him that acknowledgement and that feeling that everything he does is so crucial to your happiness and joy and success in life, makes him feel responsible. Then of course he wants to take out the garbage for this sweet lady who thinks the world of him. He lives up to your highest, the highest, your high opinion
expectations.
Right, exactly. High expectations. You ask the question.
I find that is so powerful, but I find today women feel more and more today, and maybe Dr. Lieberman knows something to add to that, but women feel today that they're bringing so much to the table, and they really don't buy into that the blessing is coming through their husband, because they're bringing in everything, meaning either they're working or whatever it is, they're the money makers, especially some husbands out with COVID who are out of jobs. There's just so many aspects. They're bringing the kids. I mean, like, they just feel as though...
It's a bigger hurdle today than it was before.
Yes,
does Doctor have any advice on how to...
Look, derech haTeva, as we say, the way of the world, yes, it very much looks like that, feels like that, and it may even be that. And just to, to round out the point that you mentioned, that we learned that, bracha, blessing, comes from, for having shalom, from having peace in our marriage, in our relationship. And so, if put it this way, if what you've been doing hasn't been effective and you find yourself frustrated, angry, resentful, why not give this way a opportunity to see what unfolds? Try it for 30 days. The worst case is you can go back to the old way. If you forget, we'll remind you what you were doing. But just see what things look like. I mean, it just logically, it makes sense. And so, and we're not talking about, certainly an artificial, like hooray, my husband tied his shoelace. But when you're able to connect and own, this is true with everyone, by the way, equally so with ourselves. When we connect with our own strength, our own power, our own greatness, we rise up to it. We don't move forward in our own lives by beating ourselves up. Person goes off the diet, they say, I'm such a fool, I'm such an idiot. They're not moving forward. Self-compassion, acknowledging that we fell down, but that we want to dust ourselves off and get up. That's how we move forward, and that's how our husband moves forward, from a position of strength, not from a position of being beaten up and weakened.
Wow, that's awesome. I want to read a quote from Doctor, and then maybe you'll answer the question on it. So the quote is, where is it? Here. Okay. Our focus is our reality. What we choose to focus on becomes our world. It produces our thoughts, values, attitudes, and beliefs. So that's mind-boggling. Can you explain that? And then also, can you explain how do we make sure we're focused on the right thing?
Excellent. Sure. People think that our emotional state just comes out of nowhere. Painting with a broad brush here, it's always a broad brush. There are a lot of asterisks. But, our emotional state, our mood comes from our thoughts. We don't find ourselves feeling something unless we're thinking something. And our thoughts come from our focus. So what you're focused on is what you're thinking about, is what you're feeling. So if you walk, you're the kind of person that can walk into a room and no matter how beautiful and amazing everything is, he'll find the one thing that's not right. Those people are not a treat to live with. And if that's our spouse, recognize that, we can help him to reorient his perspective. And it doesn't happen from beating him up when he points that out. But in our own lives, if we're focused, I'm sorry?
How does that happen? I want to know how that happens. You said it doesn't happen by pointing it out.
Yeah.
You have a friend who walks into a beautiful simcha, everything. They're like, those flowers over there don't match the rest of the thing. And you're like, really? So how do you shift them?
Good. Okay, we're going to go to, okay. So the short answer, and there's always short and long, I've got, as you know, 100+ talks on Torah anytime. And so, I speak very fast. So I'll do my best to try and condense this. But the reason you have to go to the core, why is somebody negative? Ask yourself the question, why does somebody look for the negative rather than the positive? Right? Notice, what is it about it? It's not their world. See, their world is the same as yours. It's their perspective, right, is based on where they're looking at, and it's their ego that blocks perspective. There's something I repeat often in my talks, that perspective is synonymous with sanity, my ability to see, accept, and respond to my world. When a person's perspective is wide, that means I can see reality clearly. Right? When your perspective is myopic, you're focused on something narrow, you're worried about somebody's worried about a health issue, money issue, whatever it is, you can't see clearly. Your perspective is very narrow. And you become more imbalanced. It's the ego that blocks perspective. If I'm unhappy with me, I am focused on the negative in the rest of the world. There's an old saying, what Susie says about Sally says more about Susie than Sally, meaning that how we see the world is a direct reflection of ourselves. As you know, I wrote books, as you mentioned, on personal development, self-help, but I also write for law enforcement, tactics of interview and interrogation, and on reading people. And this is where we're bringing, those ideas in. And so it's when a person has a certain feeling that we all have what we call our personal narrative, our story that we tell ourselves. This is the way the world is, and this is why I'm me. I have to justify myself to me every day. You have to be you. Everyone listening has to justify themselves to themselves and to anyone who listen. That means then that whatever story comes into my world, my narrative now has to shift in order to reconcile this with my own personal narrative. Because I can't have that dissonance that we call cognitive dissonance, that gap. I have to reconcile it. For example, somebody does something to you. They become a jerk. They become a bad guy. It's very hard for an ego-oriented person to look in the mirror, right, and to say, what did I do in order to do that? we have to create a narrative very quickly. So the person who is negative, you could point out to you blue in the face, why are you so negative? Why blah, 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 and you will never budge them anywhere. Ultimately, what you want to do is get them to see themselves differently. And by seeing ourselves differently, we look at our world differently. How you see yourself differently, that's a whole other bowl of wax. But you cannot tell somebody, it's like facing east, saying, just, look there, look for the sunset. It just doesn't happen. They can't see it because their perspective is off. You've got to turn them around, then they could see what it is you want them to see.
So this is what you're saying, how to change people is to see them in a certain way that brings out the best in them.
Well, so you said in 10 seconds when it took me 10 minutes, but yes.
Okay, just want to make sure. And then you're going to go and explain the focus, because we didn't really nail that. I want to understand.
Oh, right. I just wanted to button this up also insofar as that, people ask sometimes, how can I, help somebody that doesn't want to get help? Or how can I bring somebody out of the doldrums? And the answer really is just a more definitive, concretized way of doing this. When somebody knows that you accept them, you love them, you care for them unconditionally, they'll keep on pushing you away. At some point, they're going to get tired. When they realize that you really care about them, they're going to ask themselves this one question. That question is, am I worth something? And they'll begin to think, maybe I am, because you're investing so much in me, which is why sometimes the most difficult people, whomever it is, will push us away because their narrative is, I'm bad, I'm worthless, everyone is lousy, I got a bad deal. So they have to push you away in order to continue that narrative. But when the reality keeps on butting up against this narrative, they can only sell themselves so long before they have to shift their narrative. And that begins asking themselves a question of, maybe there's something to me, which is why the idea of unconditional acceptance is so critical to relationships. That does not mean approval. A whole other story, and we can get into the distinction between acceptance and approval. But going back to the other thread about focus. So if you remember where we were, about 7 minutes.
Yeah,
right.
Hold on a sec. We're going to do focus, but I just want to remind everybody who's watching, type. This is your chance to get your deep spiritual questions answered, and it's psychology and about how to get along better with your husband, how to become a successful nagger. Now's your time. Type them in. Oh, I see Sarit's waving. She's got a bunch of questions already. Hold on. He's going to give a standing on one foot about focus, and back at you, Sarit. Okay.
Good. Okay. Again, our emotional state doesn't come out of anywhere. It comes from our thoughts. Our thoughts create our focus. So our focus is created by, as we mentioned before, the reticular activating system. What you choose to focus on, the world, maybe you have the experience of thinking about renting or leasing a new car, and suddenly you see more of those on the road. It's not because, that they were suddenly manufactured more, but rather because that is what's relevant to you. That's what you see. If you make a conscious decision, if there are a silver bullet of improving our own outlook and the outlook of somebody else, it would be to make a conscious decision to focus on the good in our spouse, in somebody. I tell them, have in your mind, you're going to focus on the good. People are always so concerned, what's the right thing to say to my child, to say to my spouse. But more important than what you say to your spouse is what you think of your spouse. If you're focused on the positive, everything will flow from that. I'm telling you, just look for the good. You're going to see the good, and he will become more good.
This is a game changer. Okay, Sarit, what's the questions?
Firstly, Dina from Torah Anytime's live stream said, ego blocks perspective is so true. Like the ego is probably the biggest thing that, does that. But we have a question. How do you get your husband to see that you're where you've always put them down and always been hard on them or always nagged them, and now you actually want to try this? How do you get them to see you're improving or that you made a change?
Great question. What are the two most important words in any marriage?
Love you.
Cleaning lady. No.
Right. Sarit
What'd you say?
I'm right.
I'm right. Yeah. Right. So what you want to do, and once again, we draw a parallel with when it comes to chinuch, when it comes to child raising, and that is you do a hard reset. See, here's the thing. She's exactly right. Asked the question. It's a brilliant question because it's your husband has a certain expectation of a dynamic, and very once in a while he'll get one of these like, "Yeah, Shakar, great for doing whatever," and he sees himself through your eyes. And it's very hard to undo that unless you come in with the following approach. Once again, we have a protocol. It's a protocol for everything. Just like in psychology, you have to, give everything a label, otherwise you can't bill insurance. In psychology, right? You have to get protocol. So like this. Once again, you have a conversation, not in a, we need to talk, come right now. All you're doing is making him feel less empowered, less respected, big mistake. Whoever you want to do a hard reset in the relationship with, in this case, your spouse, you have to put them in a position of power. That means you don't come in, insisting that they see what, hear from your perspective, listen to what you have to say or speak now. You come into it. The approach is everything. You say to your spouse, I'd love for us to talk. Can you let me know, when is a good time? First, he'll be thinking, who replaced my wife with this person who's asking me this? But secondly, you'd be like, sure. Now when you engage with him, right? He's coming in from a position of not feeling, again, we'll assume the dynamic has been a little bit where he feels dented, not feeling like he's going to get beaten up again. The phrase that, can send husbands' hearts beating uncomfortably fast is, we need to talk. No good ever came from that phrase. So better to phrase it is, I'd love to have a conversation about something. And I tell you, one of the best things, someone mentioned the Chavis Chaim Heritage Foundation. I recently did the Tisha B'Av presentation with them. And I said, one of the best ways, just in general, to be able to establish a dialogue with somebody who you may have a difficult time with, and that's simply to say is, I owe you an apology. Everyone will drop anything when they hear I owe you an apology. So it's a very good way. You come into it and you say, you know what, for a long time, and then whatever it is, I've been giving you a hard time, blah, 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 blah. And then you take full and complete responsibility. It's very important. Are you there, by the way? I see the screen split. I want to make sure the internet didn't go. Okay, good. Okay, fine. Okay,
yeah,
great. So here's the thing. You want to make sure that you don't come into you saying to your spouse, you know what, I was only this because you did blah, blah, blah. Now you're back to confrontation. Again, as we said in the beginning, if you don't accuse your husband of doing anything, you'll never get defensive. Whether you're dealing with a serial killer, your child, or your spouse, dynamics are the same. Hopefully they're not the same person. You come into it, take full responsibility. I had always given you a hard time for blah, 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 blah. It was wrong of me. I can see now, blame it on anything. You got hit by a brick, you listen to something, you woke up in the morning, or you just, whatever it is, I owe you an apology. It was so wrong of me. Ask for forgiveness, apologize, let your husband know, I will do everything possible. And then again, you blame it. I, for whatever reason, blame it on childhood, blame it on, and it is, what reason why we blow things out of proportion, a lot of transference, it's not what our spouse does, but it's what meaning we attach to it, and we attach a meaning that usually occurred some other time. So, you acknowledge that a lot of this is your own stuff. What you've done or not done, it's not the end of the world. You're so great with this, so great with that, and I just feel lousy. As you begin to talk, your husband will say, it's okay. He will begin to comfort you and let you know it's okay. He understands. It's not so bad. And I will tell you, he will be a different person because you realize, you know what? Why do we seek out forgiveness? I just want her to acknowledge or him to acknowledge that I'm right or to validate. What is it about somebody saying, okay, I see what you're saying, that people will hold out for having a relationship with their spouse, with their children, with their siblings, with their parents for 20, 30, 40 years, is because we want someone to acknowledge that we are not the bad guy. You have to appreciate how important that is. So when you come into it, you say, I owe you, and you said, I'm going to work on my, the thing is, you're going to fall down. And when you make a mistake, you don't want him to think, oh, she's back to her old self. You want to set it up in advance saying, I know me, and I've just got these old patterns. I'm going to be working on this until the day I die in 120. I'm going to, and then say something concrete. I started listening to talks on this, on Torah Time, or I started reading this book. I want to be better. I'm going to fall down. I just want you to know it's not your doing, it's mine. Your spouse will be so appreciative because, by the way, this is how he feels anyway, that it is your stuff. But deep down inside, he knows that he brings a lot of his own issues to the table, and he'll be able to acknowledge those as soon as you come completely clean on yours.
Except it seems like now you're, in a certain sense, blaming the victim. You know what I mean? Like, in other words, if the woman is sitting there and she's saying, you know, I'm always the one, and now he's going to use all the stuff I've given him, he's going to use it against me and hold me to this high standard and roll his eyes at me when I do that thing again.
Terrific. Here's the thing. First of all, your husband is rolling your eyes at you because he feels that you are contemptuous, which is disaster in a relationship. Contempt is even worse than hatred. It's like a moral stamp of what the person's doing, that you are morally superior to them. He's rolling his eyes because this is how he feels you're looking at him. It's sort of a nonverbal defense mechanism.
He dubs. We're talking about the generic husband. My husband, whatever, is etc.
Of course not. Yeah.
Just have to make that clear. Okay, good.
And we're certainly not speaking about, you know, my spouse and any of this stuff. You know, people say that, you know, you can't get everything you want in a spouse. I want you to know my wife is the exception.
You know, Baruch Hashem.
She got everything she wanted.
Oh, wait, we got more questions coming in, and I had another question for you. Okay, wait.
Okay, let me go ahead and just answer that very good question. That's like this. What you've been doing now is causing anger, resentment, and frustration. In other words, blaming him for not doing what he's never going to do in 120 anyway, getting frustrated. It's not working. So, and by the way, this is being authentic. This is being real. What's real? Taking out the garbage. I got news for you. It's not the end of the world. I know it's important. Shabbos guests, where they sit, not the end of the world. Whether you lease or rent, not these things are only the end of the world is the end of the world. Meaning that whatever it is we get upset about, certainly disproportionately, is because of our own stuff. So even if you're not in touch with that, it is your stuff, you can say, I know it's my stuff. I don't know why it drives me so crazy that you blah, 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 blah. I know it's not the end. This is authentic. This is real. The more real you are and honest and authentic with how you feel and how it's caused you frustration, which is real, but it's not on him. I'm telling you, at the very least, by the way, he won't be walking around thinking that he's less. You won't be walking around feeling frustrated. And he may or may not do it as you want. We're not talking about blaming the victim. We're talking about taking responsibility for ourselves. That's not blaming the victim. That's holding ourselves and being accountable for what it is that we can control.
How do you get that insight? It seems almost impossible to sort of wake up one day and sort of take responsibility for your bad behavior.
Right. That's why I have 100 talks on Torah. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, no, but look, the ego, the ego wants to do a lot of things. The very last thing on its list is taking responsibility. Right? We go back to the original chet, the original sin, right? You know, God called out to Adam, and Adam said, hey, what's going on? He said, hey, don't blame me, blame the missus. The missus said, hey, don't blame me. Then she pointed to the little snaky guy who couldn't do this anymore because he had lost his arms and legs. Everyone passed the buck. As a matter of fact, the rabbis teach us that had Adam and Rishon, Adam the first man, taken responsibility, done tshuva, done repentance, all would have been forgiven. So we don't want, that's the Yetzer Hara, the ego incarnate, the part of us that distorts reality. So the degree to which we are honest with ourselves and we accept who we are, once again, a different conversation, we're able to accept ourselves, we can accept our spouse. The degree to which we don't accept us, we cannot accept our spouse. So the more honest you are with who you are, the good, the bad, and the ugly, which is why self-acceptance is so important, the more easygoing you're going to be with your spouse. And we know that people who are, you know, the hardest on themselves, they're the hardest on everyone else, typically.
No, it's a for sure true. Sarit, okay, you're on with your question, then I have a question. Go. Awesome.
Okay, firstly, from Torah Anytime live stream, Dina said the two most important words in marriage are need you and thank you.
Okay,
so,
that's good.
You know, important. But Stacy Silverman on Facebook said, how do we stay strong within ourselves while they're pushing us away, especially if it takes years?
Sorry, can you say that one more time, please?
Yes, it's how do we stay strong within ourselves while they're pushing us away, especially if it takes years. Obviously, there's baggage and years of hurt, and now you're trying to make amends. They're pushing you because they did, and they don't want to do it again.
Okay, so here's the thing. You know, you mentioned I wrote a book called Never Get Angry Again, and you know, I told someone just the other day, sometimes I want to throw the book across the room, and I wrote the book. So you know, we're human beings, and there's a saying that hurt people hurt. Your husband's anger towards you, his disconnection, is either to avoid pain or to inflict pain. I know it sounds awful to speak to think of our spouse, but you know, to different degrees, we all have different ways of channeling our anger, some passive aggressive, some aggressive, some people shut down. There are 5 different modes that, based on our personality of how people deal with anger. And in God's infinite wisdom, he puts different people together. So one person shuts down, the other one's screaming, and it doesn't, that's communication, foundation of any relationship, which in of itself is something we have to get to. But the answer to your very good question is that first is, understand that your husband's detachment, his pushing away, is only the result of being in pain himself. So when you're able to come in, again, do a hard reset, it's not going to wipe the slate clean necessarily, but it will give you a space and opportunity to re-engage in a different dialogue. And he's going to push, by the way, or depending on the metaphor, he's going to separate. Because, when a person feels like they've been beaten up for a while, they begin to detach to avoid the pain of being vulnerable. See, if I'm attached to you, you can cause me pain. But if I separate, right, if I cut off, then you can't knock me off. You can't hurt me. You can't injure me. And sometimes, of course, women will do that as well. They will detach from themselves, their husbands maybe emotionally, because they don't want to risk that feeling of pain, of being vulnerable, because if they're disconnected, there's no connection to that pain. So what you want to make it as safe as possible for your husband to venture out. Think of a turtle. He's going to stick his head out of the shell. As just parenthetically, I was speaking about this with the whole Corona thing. One of my 5 billion Zoom talks. I'm so zoomed out, I'm sure everyone else is. But about teenagers coming out of the room, and it's really the same thing. A teenager comes out of the room. Every time he comes out, he's hit with another. How come you didn't do this? How come you didn't do that? He's going to go back into his room. It's not a fun place out there. Same thing with your husband. Any overture he makes to connect with you, even if it's past the soul or how anything, take it as an opportunity. Please, please, please do not disagree. Do not, any disagreement is seen as being shut down if he's coming from a very vulnerable state. How could you say that? That's ridiculous. Don't think that. Or anything other than that's fascinating. Tell me more. Right, is going to cause a very fragile male to withdraw back again into a shell. It has to be safe. He's going to venture out. Hopefully, when he does, you have to make it as safe and as secure as possible by engaging positive. The more he does that, you're going to see he's going to reconnect. If he gets his hand slapped, and his hand is going to be looking for that slap, by the way, it'll be misinterpreting even a glance. You may mean nothing but it, but he'll see it that way. You have to do damage control very quickly. The more he comes out and he sees it's a warm, nurturing environment, the more he's going to begin to come out and reconnect.
Wow, that is just absolutely gorgeous. Thinking about a turtle, that's so visual, that's so helpful. Like in the heat of the moment, everyone can use that. That's really awesome. I wanted to ask you, can you tell us a story about somebody who had the issue of focus or issue of nagging and whatever, and how they were able to turn it around? One of your patients, one of your clients, or whatever, that over the years, just tell us a success story.
Oh yeah, I certainly just tell you success stories. I won't tell you the ones that things didn't work out. I tell you a story about a guy, a lovely guy who was really a tough cookie, very, very tough cookie. Personality disorder, and I'm just very, very careful, even though we're, in opening up to the world, just, about the problem with people with personality disorders. What's that? They all think I'm talking about them anyway. So, in an unnamed city, unnamed state, unnamed country, Brooklyn. So this guy was really just having a hard time with his wife, and one of his things was, he always complained that, she would never make the kind of challah he wanted to say. Everything was whatever. And I said to him like this, I said, what? I'm just thinking, does that been better? Might I switch stories? I know it's awful to, guys, I'm going to switch midstream here. This is just because this happened more, this vignette, what I'm sharing right now, unfolds constantly. So this is something maybe more relatable. I'm giving a talk, a great organization, Cure of Tuni. It's like, I don't know, it's like a Hasidic Project Inspire, if that means anything to anyone. Okay. I'm talking about the idea, actually speaking about marriage, about also not being critical and so on. And this guy comes to me afterwards, and I said, I want to share something with you. I was married for about 10 years, and during this entire 10 years, my wife never, ever, ever made the beds. He said it was driving me absolutely crazy. And the more I tell her, this is sort of, I know, role reversal, but make the bed. And he said, how hard is it just to do one of these things? You know, I'm thinking, well, why don't you do this if it's not that hard? Okay. He said, I always thought, just made it, never made it. He said one time they had company, rarefied occasion, she made the beds. And he said, rather than do one of these like, oh, wow, you know, whatever, he said, I sat her down, and this was before I had mentioned it, but it was what I spoke about. So he said, I just, you know, sort of, proof of concept, as they say. I sat her down, I said, by the way, I know that I've been giving you a hard time about the this and that. I know it's not the end of the world. I just really appreciate that you made it this time. Even if you're not even making it, forget about the reason that she did whatever. I really appreciate you did it. He said, I want you to know, for the past, whatever, 12, 15 years he's been married since then, she's never not made the bed. Nobody moves forward. Every time I share the story, someone else tells me another story about what I started to say about the challah. Just, you know, nobody moves forward feeling like they're no, your husband does not want to feel like he is letting you down, like he's a failure, like he hasn't measured up, he hasn't lived up. So when you point out to him, and no wife wants to feel this way, of course, either, but since talking to ladies, so when you point out his flaws, he sees that, again, if he's feeling a little bit vulnerable, as a deficiency, as a defect, and he's going to get defensive. If he sees it not as his deficiency, but rather yours, meaning he is so amazing, so wonderful, this is something that you're having a hard time with. While you're working on it, you just ask for his, you know, flexibility and forgiveness, and if he can, you know, get to a grade just because, you know, it's like example like this. This someone has a peanut allergy, right? If spouse had a peanut allergy, you wouldn't be eating peanut butter saying, it's your allergy, why can't I enjoy peanut butter, right? So you would do what you can in order to accommodate their physiology, their physical deficiency. Here, it's an emotional deficiency. The fact that, you know, your spouse or you is unable or incapable in this area doesn't mean that, you know, that the other spouse has to point it out and your job to correct. There's what to be said for accommodating our spouses' inefficiencies. And rather than, again, point them out, is to acknowledge them as not the end of the world. And once again, take it on yourself if you can.
That's fantastic. We got another question in here, and that's just, it's game changer day. Okay, go ahead, Sari.
So I have a question from Facebook, but I'm not exactly clear on what the question is. So I'm going to say it, and then afterwards, I guess,
type it in whoever wrote the question in, whatever.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, how does the idea of staying positive play out if you're dating? If you someone that you see potential in the guy you're serious with, but I don't know.
Okay. So fine. Look, I have a lot to say. Some of my most popular talks are on dating. In part, by the way, because I do work with FBI profilers. So, you know, when you're able to know, you know, who the serial killer is, helps you know who the guy you're marrying is. And it's, you know, once again, you see a lot of parallels.
Hello.
So a lot to say here, but just to your basic question is, Rev Noah Weinberg of blessed memory used to say, you know, the Torah definition of love isn't blind. You know, the rest of love isn't blind. Love is going into a relationship with eyes wide open, but focusing on the person's milas, on their strengths, identifying with the good. So on a date, by the way, in terms of, there's a lot to talk about here in terms of about connecting and making a good first impression. And I thoroughly encourage, when you go out, ladies, don't evaluate and have that narration in your head. What is he doing? I can't believe you spoke to the waitress like this. How does he speak to our kids like this? You know, our grandkids are going to come over, and you're already like 80 years down the road because he didn't ask the waitress nicely about something. Your only objective on a first date, by the way, is to make a good first impression. That's it. To make the guy feel significant, to connect with him, to enjoy the conversation. Don't judge, don't evaluate. Save that for after the date. Because in terms of, like we call game theory, is that if you're focused on him, whether or not you like him, you're not able to connect with him, and you're hyper-focused on how you're coming across. And if you're both doing that, you have that disconnection we call lack of chemistry. Rather, if your only objective, your focus is, let me just enjoy, focus on the positive. We said, if whatever he says, now, look for the good. There'll be plenty of time to pull back the lens. But when you look for the good, you're going to connect in a much different way. If he says something that, look, we've all been there. We said or done something we wish we could take back in a second, but it's sort of out there. It just for now, on that day, for those 2-3 hours, ignore the nonsense. Focus on just connecting, having a positive relationship, helping that person to to communicate if he's not very communicative, and then revisit it. But in evaluating whether or not this is someone you should marry, that's not the time simply to focus on the positive. That's the time to take a good balanced look and to ask yourself, eyes wide open, here are his strengths, here are the weaknesses. And it's not just about not having weaknesses, is can I live with those weaknesses? Plenty of relationships function tremendously well with people with serious emotional deficits only because they go together. But you can have people who are reasonably healthy, but if they got poor communication or they don't accept the other person's weaknesses, it doesn't work. So the question you want to ask yourself is, is this something that on balance, assuming that he never changed, that I'm okay with?
That's fantastic. And we have time for just one more question, but I want to ask Rabbi, how can people, Doctor, how can people get in touch with you? How can they reach you and read your more of your books and everything? We have a link. I'm not sure what link is. That's your website. How can people?
Yeah, thank you. So my practice is full. So in that respect, I don't have the opportunity to engage people really one-on-one, but I got plenty of free resources on Torah anytime. Just go to Acting Against David Lieberman, DOVID, and hit the follow button, and you'll get weekly talks that I do updated on there. I have about a dozen books. I don't recommend them all. One book you can get for free, a copy of Real Power. Just text the word Torah to the short code 313131. You get a free copy of that. I think also on YouTube, there's probably like a zillion videos and stuff.
Link below that you can click on that will keep, it's going to be on our websites, on our Facebook, it's on Torah, and we'll have that link at all the various places so you can click on, and then from there you can go elsewhere, whatever, and it's Lieberman, Lieberman. But the last question I want to ask, standing on one foot, if you had to give married women, and any women on relationship, but I'm just talking about in terms of a marriage, even more so, what is the couple of qualities, 1, 2, 3 qualities that a woman can grow herself in? This is Elul. This is the time of year where we're thinking about how can we step up our game? How can we be better? How can we improve? What can we do to make next year better than this year? So what are a couple of traits or things that we all can be working on at this time specifically to up our game in our marriages?
Terrific, great. I'm going to show you how, just to sort of amplify one thing we spoke about, how to triple your satisfaction in your marriage by doing one simple thing. Triple it, okay? Simple. The next time your spouse does something that you appreciate, rather than simply let it go in and out of your head or simply say a quick thank you, spend a little bit more time on that. See, if we recognize that there's something called the focusing illusion, and I know we're going to go down a rabbit hole, but psychologically, it means that nothing is as important as we think it is while we're thinking about it. And the more time we spend thinking about something, the more it magnifies its significance. So that's true with positive and negative. You focus and dwell on the negative, it becomes bigger in your mind, it becomes more significant, more relevant. The less time you give it, less attention you give it, the less significance it acquires. So if you're now focused and on a Karsa Tov, on appreciation, on gratitude, on the good with your spouse, and you spend more time on that, the space in your mind, in the synapses, we have to appreciate when you're looking for the good. The brain will literally reconfigure itself. Whole other field neuroplasticity in terms of the connection between neurons, these dendrites, the connections grow stronger. When you're looking for the good, you will do mental gymnastics in order to flesh it out, for it to materialize, for it to come out of the situation. And you will manifest it in the most real, practical way. And you'll be able to connect with it, and that will become your reality. If you focus on the negative, whether or not it's there, you'll take that thread, you'll pull on it until everything untangles. If there's one silver bullet, focus on the positive in your spouse, in your life, but most importantly, in yourself.
Wow. Focus on yourself. Like, don't beat yourself up, but think about all the good qualities. And, yeah, I didn't do this and I didn't do this, but I did do that. And I did this and I felt this and I treated this person that way. Always look at yourself from a positive place, you're saying.
100%. We all grow ourselves and our spouse from a position of strength, from a position of encouragement, from a position of love and respect. Beat yourself up, you're not going to move forward. The idea of tshuva, the idea of repentance, the idea of acknowledging. Let me give a quick. If you want to drive from Lakewood to Brooklyn, your GPS is going to first locate where you are. You're in Lakewood if you want to go to Brooklyn. If you don't acknowledge where you are, who you are, how you are, and accept that right now, you can't move forward. You're too busy justifying, rationalizing, covering your eyes. So really the beginning of accepting yourself is acknowledging who you are, what you've been through, and really celebrating every aspect of yourself. And once again, the more accepting you are of yourself, the more accepting you'll be of the world around you, and particularly your spouse.
Fantastic. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us today. This was real game changer in many, many ways. We got to get more of you. Everybody find those books, get the books, watch the shows. Slowly but surely, these very deep concepts can make a huge world of difference to your satisfaction in your life going forward. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Leah Richeimer for the Ladies Talk Show. We'll see you next time.